Welcome, everybody. You can all check you're in the right room. If you've seen me before, this is your chance to make an escape. Welcome to this session that we've called A Lazy Coder's Guide to Exploiting Class Features. One day I will do a course on how to write shorter presentation titles. But the idea of this session, or when we were talking about sessions for this conference at the end of last year, I was writing quite a lot of code at the time, and I found I was doing using the same tricks over and over again. And I wanted to talk about some of those tricks. At the same time, I've managed to get myself a deal to write a PowerShell book, and I happen to be writing a section on classes for the book. And when I wrote the section on classes, the first quite a few pages were basically why you don't need to use PowerShell classes. And it seemed a little bit kind of backwards, but I was talking about that same set of tricks. So that's what this session is about. So if that sounds like the wrong kind of session for you, the doors are still open. You've got a chance to get to a different session. As with all the sessions here, we are grateful to our sponsors. I think if you've been sitting in the audience for a lot of sessions now, you'll have heard lots of thanks to the sponsors. I don't want to labour the point, but they do make it possible for this to happen. We are very grateful to them, but there are only a certain number of different ways we can say that. A little bit about me. I spent the first 10 years of this century working for Microsoft. People always laugh when I say it was like being married to a beautiful psychopath, so I keep saying it. Since leaving Microsoft, most of my time has been spent freelance, and I'm just getting to the point where I can concentrate on writing books and taking photographs and not going and listening to people arguing about how things should be done in a bank. I've been involved in quite a few modules over the last 15 and 16 years. The first Hyper-V support in PowerShell was down to me. When I left Microsoft, the Hyper-V team kind of rewrote it all, but they used my template for how it should look. Doug Fink created this wonderful module called Import Excel, and I kind of went, the export's a bit lacking, so a lot of the export in Import Excel is mine, and a couple of other modules on there. I keep mentioning this Microsoft Graph++ module, but it's a bit neglected at the moment. Now, quick show of hands. Who got taught any kind of computer programming at school or later? Right, okay. So you know a little bit about classes and record types from doing that. And when we start teaching people to program, we assume, as kind of teachers of computer science, that the world is kind of confined to that program. Yeah, we're going to define everything in our program. And the other thing that you notice when we teach people to program is it's all about printing stuff on the console. Yeah. The most important statement in BASIC is print. Yeah. Similar for Python. But just to kind of get everybody on the same page with classes, originally when we started teaching programming, or when I started learning to program and everybody learnt stuff in Pascal, we got introduced to record types, and we said, okay, you can have a composite piece of data that's got more than one field, and it's either made up of numbers or bits of text or other composite bits of data like this one, or pointers actually, but we'll ignore pointers because that's going down a little bit of a rat hole. And my computer science, because I did a computer science degree in the 1980s. Yes, I'm that old. My computer science lecturers would say, okay, so you've defined your types, and then you define functions that take those types and they produce particular kinds of output. And the world moved on from that, and we said, right, instead of procedures and functions to work with those record types, we'll bond everything together and make more sophisticated objects. So we then had objects that were record types, but they had executable bits attached. And that was kind of that idea was nice and solid. Then PowerShell came along and said, but hang on, there's a couple of extra bits we can do around objects. Every time we output an object, we can attach formatting to that type. And it's not part of the class declaration, because in the early days, PowerShell didn't define classes at all. Classes were coming in from .NET, and PowerShell said, when you see one of those, here's how you should format it. And we also can add extra members onto classes, and this is part of the extensible type system. But most of the time, we're not defining classes from scratch in our PowerShell programs because something else is doing the work for us. We've got a .NET object or something that's come from SIM or WMI, whichever you call it, or maybe from COM, or maybe it's a database record, okay? Or we might just craft it together with a hash table or a PS custom object. If you were watching Rob's presentation at the keynote really closely, you noticed he had some tabular data, and because he's a database guy, he said, I'm going to make a database table, and then I've got something nice and grid-shaped, and I can put column headings across it, and it's got rows, and I've got my objects. All right? And my computer science professors back in the 1980s would all, you don't want to do it like that. You want to define the types in your program, and we all look at that and go, no, we don't. We just want to go home. One of my favourite quotes of Jeffrey Snover's was, computer scientists want elegant algorithms and IT professionals just want to go home. Okay, we want to do it in the quick and short and easy way. So we're not going to do a great deal of creating classes from scratch in PowerShell. There are places where that's really good, and it helps to organise the code, and it lights up certain things in PowerShell, but classes are not really that life-changing. So we can write classes, we can write them in C#, we can either write them in C# and compile them outside PowerShell, or we can use add type and they get dynamically compiled and we get a little temporary DLL that gets loaded. And from version 5 of PowerShell onwards, we can write our own classes in PowerShell. But, like I was saying, we don't need to do that terribly often. I make a lot of REST API calls to get data off the internet. I'm doing some chat about that tomorrow. And some of those calls are supported, and some of them are rather sneaky. But we can get data like that, and it comes back and it's ready formatted for us. The same when we get something back from SIM, or we get a row back from a data table. Those things are they've already got their shape. We don't have to write a class to give the data shape. And methods on objects, they make sense sometimes. But with PowerShell, we're very used to saying we get a bunch of things and we send it down the pipeline to do stuff with it. So we don't say get an object and then, or get an array of objects and then for each one call the so-and-so method. We typically say get an array of objects and pipe them into something. And so we're used to doing that, and doing stuff with classes, not necessarily the natural way to write things in parallel. But a couple of things I alluded to earlier. Some things like custom parameter attributes you can only do using classes. When you go to tab complete something, and I now rely on tab complete to fill as much in as I possibly can. If you go, for example, get a directory and pipe it to format table or pipe it to select, the properties automatically complete as you press tab. And that works because the commandlet or function that's returning that information says, I am going to return something of this type. Go and look up what the members of that type are and use them for tab completion. And as I mentioned, PowerShell uses type names to extend objects and to format them. And some of you will know this already. For others, it's going to be sort of opening the door to secret knowledge. It doesn't even have to be a real type. I say that very quietly because it's a secret. The type can be a fake type in name only. And that's a useful trick in a lot of places. And that's really the heart of what this talk's about. For formatting, we need to put the format in XML. XML, I did a lot of stuff with XML. I don't find it a pain. I know some people do. And quite often we can copy it, but there are tools to make it easier. And we need it for formatting. For members, it's optional. Now, coming back to the definition of a class, when I have an object of a particular kind, I want stuff to go with it. Okay, so it might be I'm going to have lots of caches of things that I've got in a database table. So I'm going to have a cache for one of the database things I'm going to show you in a minute is to do with photographs, okay? So I might have a cache for different kinds of camera, different kinds of lens, different tags that I put on the photos. And if I'm going to have those caches, I don't want to have lots of different variables for all the things that make a cache. I want to make a cache object. So to easily duplicate the parts of a cache, I want one of those, or I want formatting, or I want calculated properties. Right? A lot of the time when I'm getting data back from somewhere, I go, oh yeah, I've got, and we'll see this example a bit later on, I've got the number of milliwatt hours left in my battery. Fantastic, because I really think in milliwatt hours. No, I think in quarters. Okay, how much of my battery have I got left? So divide the battery capacity by the full capacity, or the current charge of the battery by the full capacity. So I want to do a calculation, and I actually want to go and get extra properties so that when I get the battery status, I also get the capacity. IntelliSense I've mentioned for tab completion and other common things I might want to do with the object. So, who's written formatting XML files? Not many, and quite shy those who have. This is not going to be how to write those files, okay? Just take it on trust that they exist. If you don't like the way that PowerShell formats, for example, a directory listing, you can take the XML file that defines what one looks like and go and modify it. And then you can load your own. If you load your own, you need to use the first of the two commands up there and prepend it so it gets in ahead of the other definitions. And if you're just adding one, you can append it on the end. Okay. And somewhere among my gists on GitHub, I have got something to change the way that directories look, because somebody was asking, could we please have, I can't remember if it was the date or the file size, written in a different format. Please, can PowerShell change itself to look the way I want it to look? No. But you can make it look the way you want it to look, and somebody else can make it the way they want it to look, and I can have it the way I want it to look, and we can all have different versions just by replacing the format files. Brilliant. Go and steal from those files, the pre-existing ones. There is, and we'll see it briefly, there is a tool to actually show you what the current formatting is, and there are some tools. James Brundage, one of the people who was at Microsoft at the same time as me, has a module on the PowerShell gallery called Easy Out. And that makes it easier to get them. So, name-only classes then. What do I mean by name-only classes? We get the data, we put a name on the end of it. So you can do this with the add member function, or the commandlet. You can pipe something to add member, specify the type name, or if you like manipulating the properties directly, you can manipulate the type name's property. Or if you're creating a custom object, If you define your custom object with PS type name equals something, then that will be the type name. And then we can attach formatting and custom members. Now, I have spoken far too much already, so it is time for a demo of some kind. Yesterday I asked who in here was from the UK, and one person put his hand up, and I can see him in the room again. Is anybody else from the UK in here? Oh, we got two of us. Right, okay. So the people who are responsible for the railways, National Rail, publish train timetables. Okay, I have a little module that gets their published data, and I'm going to load part of it, but the important thing is I am not going to load. Let's just have a fresh PowerShell window, shall we? Oh, hang on. Dun, dun, dun. That's better. Right. I wonder how long I would have gone on without noticing if you hadn't said. This, by the way, when I was talking about the battery, this tells me I've got 2/3 of my battery left, those two little yellow bars there. And just to give me a bit more space. So I've got some code in a PSM1 file. I've also got a PSD file to load this module, and that will load some formatting. But at this point, I want to have no formatting. So I'm just going to load the code part, and then I'm going to get the departure board for London Paddington Station, which is the station I normally go in and out of London at. So there we go. That's got the data into B for board. And you can see it's classic PowerShell-y kind of, here it is formatted as a list. Okay, not desperately exciting yet. But if I pipe that to get member, what we'll see at the top of there is I've given that a type name. When I got the information back, I said this was a service coming from National Rail. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to append the path to my formatting data. Okay, so B looked like this. I'm going to append the path to the formatting data. And now if we look at B, it should say, there we go. There's in fact, let's just give it a bit more space so we can see it says at the top here what station we're looking at. And then we've got the platform where the train's going, just the way we want to actually see a departure board. All we've done is formatted it. We haven't done anything, this is not vast, complicated manipulation of it. We've just said, get the data, give it a name, attach some formatting to that name. Okay, and this does an awful lot of work for me in a lot of places. Now over here, I've got my module. Who in here is a keen photographer? Any keen photographers in? No, again. Okay, 2 hands went up then. 2 hands went up when I asked for English. Who doesn't put their hand up when the presenter asks questions? So basically what I've got is I've got a module for working with images, and in particular for working with images stored in the database from Adobe Lightroom. Okay, so I'm going to just show you, I mentioned get format data. So get format data says, if we see something that calls itself a Lightroom item, there's a Lightroom item list and a Lightroom item table. Okay, so the first one of those is the list. So that will be number 0. Number 1 will be the table. So that says, when I get something back and I say it's a Lightroom item, I want the path to where the file is, the date, and then various properties about the picture. So I've cheated here. I've actually got a query for getting this data in a text file. I'm just going to run that, and you can see again it's classic PowerShell list output. I don't know what to do with this, therefore I'm just going to display it like as a list. What I can do is I can say, okay, do that query again, but this time add a type name to it and say it's a Lightroom item. Okay, and now it looks a little bit better. Okay, that we've actually got things that look like the sort of things photographers talk about, like aperture and exposure as times, and not how they were up here as strange things that are logs of the cube of the I don't know how I can't remember how they calculate them, but anyway. And if I say I want that formatted as a table, those headings that we saw before, it's probably a little better if I make it just a fraction smaller. Those headings that we saw before actually format the data nicely. So I've got my nice formatting, and I've got extra properties just by saying take these data rows, okay, and make them and give them that extra name. Underneath, they're still data rows, but they've got an extra name added to them. So yeah, that's clever. Go back to the beginning of the presentation, because you forgot to hold the shift key down. So that's where we were. Okay, so we've seen those, and if I go to the next slide actually says, well, how about IntelliSense? Because I mentioned IntelliSense before, and one of the things I had with that photo data was I want to filter on different photo properties. Or I might want to format the table based on the different photo properties. So all I need is to put the output type into a function that uses it. So I've got a quick bit of PowerShell to write that function, and what I'm actually going to do is to show that happening. So let's go back to the Lightroom database. So my function get Lightroom. Oh, thank you. I keep assuming because I've alt-tabbed between the screens, I've come out of the presentation, and you actually have to press escape to come out. So let's just clear that. So this is just a little piece of that function just to show you the key piece of it. So in my function, get Lightroom item, after command binding and before param, I've said output type is Lightroom item. So if I do get Lightroom item, I'm going to include that same set of pictures, pipe 2, select, and start tabbing, it's putting in the fields that belong to one of those pictures that's come back from the database. Okay, fairly easy and straightforward to do. And just to prove that it's fairly easy and straightforward, over here, back in the I wonder if that's going to be happy. At one point, PowerShell was quite happy to deal with smart quotes, but some smart quotes have crept in. So I've got my railway departure board. I'm just going to take the first row in there and send it through that little filter. And that filter just says, okay, create a class definition. Okay, so that's a piece of text. I have deliberately, for this, stuck the word class on the end so that I don't try and define two versions of the same name. So I can just copy that, paste it in. How's that happened? Well, that's what happens when you try and do a live demo, I suppose. So we'll just take that and we'll see why we have got ETA defined twice. Okay, so now when I do my get station board, I can do get station board pipe to select and select property. No, that's not how it works because that doesn't exist yet. Here is a command that uses that class. Okay, so I've got get rail service 2 as a function. So I run that and it just sends some string output. But if I say pipe that to select, I've now got the properties of a rail service. Okay, so really easy to just say, here was something that 2 minutes ago I was getting it from the internet for the first time, and now I've got it in a function and I can actually use it. And I've never written a proper class to use this. Okay, well, I've kind of created a class, but I haven't said morph my objects into that class. I could do that. I think that's coming up later, so I'm going to leave that bit for now. And we'll go back to the slides. So, I should have done the thing on the previous one. Don't worry, we'll get back. I'll get back to that in a second. Now, we can extend the members of a type in two different ways. We can do it for each instance using add member. So I can do get whatever it is, pipe to add member, and then I can pipe it to add member as many times as I want. So if I'm adding the type name to the objects that are coming back from my database query, add member is great. But the type data says, for all objects that have got this name attached to them, I want you to add this information. And we can do it by putting that information in another PS1 XML file, or we can do it with update type data. And the same secret applies. It can be a type in name only. Okay. Just as a quick aside while we're on adding properties like this, PowerShell classes don't have a concept of read-only members. They can hide members, but they can't make them read-only. In C#, you can say a member is read-only. You can also give it code to get the property. Now, you can't write that get and set code in a PowerShell class, but you can add it with script properties using add member or update type data. So if you want to have a read-only property, basically you have another property that you can't see with a different name, and then you create a script property to get it. If you want a calculated property, you have a script property. And if you want to do something when a property is set, there's a second value in the add member or update type data command, and second value is the set. The value is the script block for the first one. Now, script properties will go and get something when we need them. Script methods can take parameters And if you have a script method that doesn't take any parameters, you might want it to be a property. The risk of that is that sometimes the property will go and make an API call to get some data when you didn't really need the property. And so there are occasions where it's better to say, only go and get this if I expressly call the method. So update type data, we can say, update type data, this type, and we're going to add a member with a new name. And then we can either say, I want this to be the default set of properties you display. So I've not got any formatting information apart from display these 4 or fewer properties. If we want a table, if we say more than 4 properties, we'll get a list. And you can change that number, but there's some awkward mucking about in XML to do it. Renaming columns all the time, use an alias. I prefer if I'm using single word names at the top of a column when I'm formatting something, I don't like changing the name in the table description, because then when you go to use it, you're wanting to use the name at the top of the column and not the true name of the property. So an alias means that the name at the top of the column always matches an available property name. If we need to calculate a column, so we find that we're always running the data through select object to get a calculated column, well, we can add a script property to that column. And if we don't like piping something in, or it makes sense to be able to call it as a member, that's where a script method comes in. There's no built-in export for these, so I went and wrote one. You can download it from the gallery. It's a script, not a module. It's just called export type data, and that will create the PS1 XML for you when you've used a bunch of update type data statements. So I talked about worrying about my laptop battery. Yes. So just a quick one before I leave the thing on railway data. I can convert that existing thing to my... Oh, apparently I can't. When I put that class together, something went... something did go a bit haywire, and I can't convert it. You can't see it because I'm still in there, right? I was just making excuses for something that didn't work. Please ignore them. And let's come back to here. So here is my battery status. Genuinely live. So right now, the remaining capacity of my battery is that number of milliwatt hours. It's completely meaningless to me. Okay, what would be really nice would be, first of all, if I could get the fully charged capacity. So what we're going to do is we're going to update the type data for a battery status object. Okay, we're going to add a member called fully charged capacity, which is a script property. You can see that there. And what we do to get that script property is we get the sim object for fully charged capacity for the same battery, and then we get the property from the end of that. So when we do that, update the type, and get the sim instance again. So you notice previously it ended with tag voltage PS computer name. Okay, now we've got fully charged capacity on the bottom of there. Well, that's a step forward, but really I'd also like to know what that is as a percentage. So we'll do another calculated column. You can work out what I'm doing there, and call get sim instance again. Okay, and now you can see proportion remaining is 50%. And now what I'd really like is whenever I get a battery, I'd like it formatted with a default display property set that shows just those those values. So you can see I'm not plugged in, I'm not charging, I am running the battery down, and really conveniently for this point, I'm at exactly half battery. So that's the kind of trick that we can do with update type data and so on. Now, there is a question here of when would we rather have, come on, Shift F5. When would we rather have a function, and when would we rather have an extra member on the object? So if you think of that railway API, when you ask it to give all the departure details, you can get a maximum of 10 trains. If you say, don't give me the details, it will give you everything for the next 2 hours. So we have different permutations of getting the arrivals or the departures or both, and with and without details. And then we can say, we've got a departure, we've got an ID for that departure. Would it be good if we could actually say, go from the departure with no details to getting the details? So I could say, I want a get details method, or I could say I want a details property. Really, those depend on what I think is the more convenient. But if I'm not careful, it will make the API call to get those details when I don't want it to. So a lot of the time, I will be happier to have get details. Now, yes. Should we convert this stuff to the types that we're making? Because if we're making these types for IntelliSense, should we convert them? And what I was just saying about the railway types, we can get ourselves into a problem because the data that we want to format all looks the same, but actually there are subtle differences in the properties. And when you have a type, PowerShell will try and match the members of an object that you're casting to that type to the properties in the type. And this usually works, and what I was hoping was going to work, this time I will remember to come out. What I was hoping was going to work was I should be able to cast that to the type that I made for IntelliSense, because all the properties on B on these items in the array B are present in the type that I've defined, and they'll all sort of map across quite neatly. This, by the way, is just to show you the thing about getting the service. So if I just do get rail service and specify an ID, you can see, oh, train coming in from Wales, arriving at Paddington, but it doesn't tell me where it stopped. Okay. That's odd. That should tell me where it stopped. I wonder. Anyway, I can add that and make it a script property if I want. So if I just do add script property, now instead of having to go and get that service, I can just use the details property of that object. That was the thing I was showing you before. Now, for a simple version of, because I know that class doesn't always work, I can define a new class. So here we've just got 3 things that relate to trains. Where's it going? Has it been cancelled? And then the number of carriages. Okay, so I can take an object or I can take a hash table and I can convert it to that type. All works beautifully. If I say the length is 9 coaches, now up here I've said length is a long, and here I've made it a string. It's not going to work. As just fails silently. That is by design. If I try and cast it the other way, you'll see that it says, nah, I can't map that through because I can't convert this property of the object you've given me to a property on the other side. And that's a particular problem when we deal with data that comes from a database, because when data comes from a database, DB null doesn't translate very happily. If I ever meet the person who is responsible for DB null, I will do them physical harm. DB null evaluates as true in a number of places, and it doesn't convert to an empty string and so on. But over here, in my definition of a Lightroom item, I've got a constructor for the Lightroom item that says I can give it nothing at all and it'll just give me a blank uninitialized item, or I can give it a data row. And if it's a data row, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through all of its properties, and if they match a property here, I will set that property to match. Now, you can also see in here, I've got some methods that I've added to my class, and they all call functions outside. So I've got both ways of calling them. And what I've said with this class is not only is it a class, but it inherits the interface iComparable. So I can compare it with other items. And down here, I have got the compare to, so I can say, does this sort before or after this? And it simply works on the full name of the file. Okay, so that mapping across that I showed you is one last cheat to tell you about. Because sometimes you find that you read some data, and I have had a particular problem recently reading some data from a CSV file, and I wanted to increment numbers in this CSV data and just write it back to a little tiny CSV file. And it turns out when you read the data, everything's a string. So you go, oh, I've got to change this value to a number and that one to a number. And actually, all I needed to do was create a little class and cast to that class. I jumped ahead to show you the object from the data row, so I'm not going to talk about that. So, a summary then. If we don't need formatting, well, you can just add members as necessary. If you do want formatting, then give the data a type name and create a formatting XML file, and maybe think about moving extra members from update type data into a PS1 XML file as well. If you want IntelliSense, well, there you go. You can create the bare minimum class. And if you want more class things, then you do it like that last bit that I just showed you. I have, as is traditional, overrun, but I will be around to take questions. But rather than doing questions from the floor for a length of time, to let them change the room over, if you've got questions, come and ask me as I'm packing up. So I'm going to round it off there. Thank you very much for listening.